My name is Gloria Bennett. I am 67 years old, and 12 seconds changed everything I thought I knew about family. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of the old wall clock above my television, the kind of clock that had been in my house for 30 years, steady and faithful, never betraying me. My tea had just finished steeping peppermint leaves, swirling in the cup, steam rising like a fragile ribbon. That was when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I reached for it expecting a simple reminder, or perhaps a kind message from my daughter Monica about the family trip I had spent months planning and paying for. Instead, I saw one notification, a voice message. I pressed play, and in an instant my world collapsed. Monica's voice came through cold rehearsed, stripped of tenderness. "Mom, you won't be flying with us. Derek doesn't want you on the trip." That was it. No, I'm sorry, no hesitation, no acknowledgement of what I had done. 12 seconds, a single line. I dropped the phone into my lap, my hand trembling so hard the tea in my other hand spilled onto the rug. I sat there frozen, the words echoing in my head like a cruel chant. For months, I had been the one searching for flights, comparing hotel rates, making sure everyone's passport was up to date. I had been the one who wired $5,200, my retirement savings, to secure a beachside villa in the Bahamas. I had pictured us walking together along the shoreline, me finally feeling like I belonged, no longer just the woman paying bills in the background, and yet with one breath, one message, my daughter erased me as if I were an afterthought, as if my presence were disposable. The quiet of my living room turned into a suffocating cage. I replayed the message once, then again, each time feeling my chest tighten. Monica's tone was not apologetic. It was firm, final, almost indifferent. "Derek doesn't want you on the trip." Derek, my son-in-law, a man who had never worked a day as hard as I had, who managed rental properties while leaning on Monica's salary and my support. And now he decided I was unwanted, and my daughter agreed. I stared at the cup of tea on the table. The steam had already thinned, disappearing into the stale air. Just like that warmth had left the room, left my life. For a moment, I could not breathe. The betrayal was not only in the words, but in the years behind them, years of sacrifice that suddenly felt meaningless. I thought of the nights grading papers until my fingers cramped, of tutoring children after school so I could save extra for Monica's college fund, of the weddings and birthdays where my gift was not only wrapped boxes but checks pulled from my thinning account. All of it dismissed with a sentence. My first instinct was to call back, to beg for clarity, to ask how she could do this to me after all I had done. But my hands refused to move. I let the phone sit there, black screen glaring back at me like an accusation. I whispered out loud to no one. After everything, after all of it, the words cracked and I felt tears rise hot and heavy. Then came anger. A deep, shaking anger that started low in my stomach and climbed until my jaw ached from holding it in. How dare she? How dare Monica speak those words after letting me shoulder the entire weight of their so-called family vacation? How dare Derek decide my place when he had never once reached into his own pocket for me? I stood up, pacing the living room. My heart pounded so hard it felt like the walls could hear it. Every photo frame on the mantel seemed to mock me. Monica in her graduation gown. Monica with Derek on their wedding day. Monica holding my first grandchild. Smiles that I had paid for. Smiles that no longer included me. I picked up the phone again, played the message one more time. 12 seconds. Shorter than the time it took me to lock my classroom door after school, shorter than it took me to pour a glass of water. 12 seconds was all it took for my daughter to cut me out of her life, out of a trip I had built for her. I closed my eyes and let the silence sit heavy in the room. Something inside me shifted. The shock still burned, but beneath it a harder truth pushed its way forward. I had allowed this for years. I had allowed myself to be used to be seen as nothing more than a wallet with hands. And now, with that voice message, they believed I would simply accept it again, swallow the hurt, and move on. I pressed my palms against the window pane, cool glass, grounding me as I looked outside. The oak tree in my yard swayed gently, roots strong despite decades of storms. I realized I had forgotten how to be like that tree, how to stand tall against wind instead of bending until I broke. My breath steadied. My tears dried on my cheeks, leaving tracks like scars of truth. I whispered to myself this time, not in despair, but in determination. This time I will not be silent. This time I will not pay for my own erasure. The clock ticked on. The tea had gone cold. The message sat on my phone, ready to be played again, but I didn't need to hear it anymore. I knew exactly what it meant. And for the first time in a long time, I also knew what I would do next. I did not always feel like a ghost in my own family. There was a time when my life was filled with purpose, even if it meant exhaustion every day. For 30 years, I stood at the front of classrooms, chalk dust coating my hands, voice carrying across rows of children learning their first letters, their first numbers. Teaching was never glamorous, but it was steady, and it gave me the one thing I wanted most: security for my daughter. When Monica was 5, I promised her she would never know the hunger. I had known never wear the shoes with holes in them that I wore as a child, never feel the shame of walking into school without lunch money. That promise became the law of my life. I worked overtime tutoring after school, stayed late grading essays so I could earn stipends, took on summer school programs that no other teacher wanted. I clipped coupons, skipped vacations, and told myself that every dollar saved was a brick in Monica's future. At Christmas, when other teachers bought themselves new coats or jewelry, I bought Barbie dolls and art sets, stacking them under our small tree, so Monica would feel like the world adored her. I remember one Christmas vividly. She tore into her presents, laughter filling the room, while I sat in my worn robe sipping day-old coffee. My only gift was a card from a student who wrote, "Thank you for teaching me to read." It was enough, I told myself. Monica's joy was worth it. College came and with it bills I thought would drown me, but I refused to let Monica feel the weight of them. I cashed out what little savings I had, took on an extra after-school program, even pawned a golden necklace my mother left me. The day I handed Monica her first tuition check, she hugged me tightly, whispered, "I'll make you proud." I held on to those words like they were scripture, never imagining they could one day curdle into betrayal. Then came her wedding. By then, I was already counting down to retirement, my body aching from years on my feet, my back stiff from bending over small desks. I had planned to save my retirement fund for a quiet life, maybe a small trip with church friends, maybe a modest kitchen renovation so the leaky faucet would finally stop dripping. Instead, I drained $35,000 from my pension to give Monica the day of her dreams. White flowers, a string quartet, a ballroom with chandeliers that glittered like stars. I remembered Derek's family sneering at the decorations, whispering that it was cute, but not the kind of wedding a Lawson deserved. Derek himself looked me in the eye and said, "Thanks for helping Gloria, though we did expect a bit more." Those words sliced through me, but I swallowed the sting. I smiled through the reception, told myself at least my daughter was happy. But that became the pattern. Every time there was a need, I filled it. A down payment for their condo when the market was high. A new car when theirs broke down. Babysitting every weekend so they could have a life. Bills slid across my table and I paid them. No questions, no hesitation. Each time I told myself this was what mothers did, that sacrifice was the language of love. And yet, with every check, every drained account, I felt myself disappearing. My own needs became background noise. I stopped renewing my library card because I told myself books were a luxury. I wore the same 3 church dresses for years, stitching them when seams split. I told myself it didn't matter that Monica's comfort was my comfort. Looking back now, I see the truth I refused to name. My love was real, but it had been turned into currency. Somewhere along the way, my daughter learned not to see me as a person with limits, but as a resource without end. I built her world brick by brick, and in return, she handed me silence, or worse, 12 seconds of rejection in a voice message. The memory of those sacrifices still aches in my bones. I can feel the chalk dust under my fingernails, the weight of the wedding check in my hand, the coldness of Derek's smirk. I think of all those nights when I lay awake counting dollars and praying they would stretch just far enough. I thought love was measured by how much I gave. But as I sat in my living room that night replaying her message, I realized love without respect is nothing more than a transaction. And I was tired of being the transaction. I replayed Monica's voice message so many times the words lost shape and became blades. "Mom, you won't be flying with us. Derek doesn't want you on the trip." 12 seconds. a dismissal that carried the weight of decades. Every syllable was soaked in indifference. There was no hesitation, no tremor in her voice, nothing to suggest that she was torn or conflicted. It was as if she were reading off a script Derek had written for her, a script where I played no part except the financier who had already served her purpose. The betrayal was not just in the sound of her voice, but in the silence that followed. No explanation about why. No acknowledgement of the money I had poured into that trip. Not a single word about gratitude. I had imagined the trip differently. Monica, Derek, the grandchildren, and me walking along the beach, our footprints side by side in the sand, the ocean breeze wrapping us in a rare moment of closeness. I thought maybe for once I could simply be a mother, a grandmother, a woman included. But in reality, I had bought my own exclusion. The irony cut deep. Every receipt, every transfer was in my name. The flights, the villa by the turquoise water, even the travel insurance, all secured with my money, my signature. I had imagined myself sitting on the plane, looking out the window, thinking this was worth every penny. Instead, my reward was to be cut out like an unwanted guest from a photo. I sat in my living room with the phone still in my hand, staring at the black screen. My chest felt heavy as though someone had set a stone there. I thought back to the wedding when Derek's family whispered behind their glasses of champagne when he himself sneered about how more should have been given. At the time, I told myself it was just nerves, just the stress of marriage. But now hearing his name in my daughter's mouth carrying the weight of command, Derek doesn't want you, I realized this had been building for years. He had been chiseling away at Monica's loyalty, and she had let him. The betrayal burned hotter because it was so casual. Monica hadn't said, "I don't want you to come." She hadn't owned it. She had shifted it onto him as if she were powerless, as if she had no voice of her own. And that cowardice stung just as much as the rejection. My daughter, my only child, had chosen convenience over courage. I pressed play one last time, hoping to hear even a hint of softness in her tone. But there was nothing, just the clean, sharp edge of dismissal. The kind of voice that said, "We have already moved on without you." My hand shook as I set the phone down. The air in the room was thick, pressing on my lungs. For the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in my own bloodline. The years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the drained bank accounts, none of it had bought me love. It had only rented me temporary space in her life space she could revoke with a single message. I sat back in my chair, the leather cracked and worn beneath me, and whispered to myself, "She doesn't even hear herself. She doesn't know what she's done." But deep down, I feared she did. I feared she and Derek had talked this through, planned it, and decided I was easier to erase than to include. That night, betrayal was not just an emotion, it was a verdict. My daughter had sentenced me to absence, and worse, she had done it without blinking. I could have stayed in that chair all night, paralyzed by the echo of her voice, but something inside me began to stir. At first, it was faint, like the flicker of a candle in a drafty room, but it grew stronger with every breath. The betrayal cut me, yes, but beneath the wound I felt something I had not allowed myself in years' clarity. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the oak tree in my front yard swayed against the night sky, its branches etched black against the faint glow of the street lamp. That tree had been there longer than I had lived in this house. Storms had stripped its leaves, winds had bent its trunk, yet it still stood roots deep and unyielding. My mother used to tell me Gloria respect is the only true gift. If people don't give you that, they give you nothing at all. I had ignored that wisdom for decades, convincing myself that money and sacrifice would earn me love. But looking at that oak, I realized she had been right all along. The message from Monica was cruel. Yes, but it was also a mirror. It showed me what I had allowed, what I had tolerated, what I had trained them to expect from me. I had turned my love into a bottomless well of dollars, and they had grown thirsty without ever wondering if the well might run dry. And now Derek felt bold enough to banish me, confident that Monica would stand by him, confident that I would bend again. But as I pressed my hand to the glass, cool and grounding, a thought surfaced that startled me. What if I simply stopped? What if, after all these years, I let the well close? What would they do without me? More importantly, what would I become without them draining me? The idea was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I thought of the stacks of bills I had paid without question, the groceries, the car payments, the streaming services, the vacations. I thought of the trips I never took, the books I never bought, the home, repairs I kept postponing because there was always another demand, another invoice with my name at the top. For so long, I had believed that my value as a mother was measured in receipts. But staring at that oak tree, I began to wonder if my value could be measured in something else, my dignity, my boundaries, my ability to say no. A sudden calm washed over me, unexpected and strange. It wasn't the numbness of defeat. It was the steadiness of resolve. I wiped the last of my tears and whispered, "No more." The words hung in the air, soft but powerful, a promise to myself. I returned to the table, lifted the cold cup of tea, and took a sip. It was bitter, unpleasant, a reminder of neglect. I set it down and thought tomorrow I will brew a fresh cup and drink it hot the way it's meant to be. A small act, perhaps, but a symbol. If I could reclaim that, I could reclaim more. That night I didn't sleep much, but it wasn't the restless tossing of despair. It was the kind of wakefulness that comes with planning, with envisioning a life I had never dared to imagine. A life where my love wasn't for sale. A life where my daughter would face the truth of her choices, not be shielded by my endless giving. By dawn, as the first pale light slipped between the curtains, I felt different. Tired, yes, but anchored. The betrayal had not broken me. It had woken me. And once awake, I could never go back to sleep. The sun rose pale and cool, and with it came my decision. I had spent a lifetime reacting to what Monica and Derek wanted, letting their needs dictate my days, my money, my peace. But this morning was different. I stood in my kitchen, brewed a new cup of tea, and drank it hot while steam curled against my cheeks. It tasted sharp, alive. It tasted like change. The first step was simple. I sat at my old wooden desk, pulled out the folder where I kept travel documents, and opened my laptop. The booking confirmation for the Bahamas villa blinked up at me, a cheerful email with palm tree emojis in the subject line. I had imagined myself reading it with excitement, not with the kind of cold resolve that pulsed through me now. I clicked on Manage Reservation, entered my information, and pressed Cancel. A red warning flashed, "This action is permanent." Are you sure? I hovered for only a second, then pressed Yes. The deposit was non-refundable, but I did not care. Watching that cancellation confirmation appear on my screen felt like watching chains fall from my wrists. Next were the flights. 4 tickets all booked under my account. I called the airline, my voice surprisingly steady. "Yes, I'd like to cancel all of them." "No, I don't need to rebook." "Yes, I understand the fees." The agent on the other end hesitated. "Ma'am, are you sure these are international flights?" "I'm sure," I said. When the confirmation numbers arrived in my email, I smiled, not the kind of smile that came from joy, but from justice. Then came the credit cards. I had given Monica an authorized user card years ago when she claimed she needed it for emergencies. Emergencies had quickly become groceries, clothing, gas, and sometimes spa appointments. I called the bank and said firmly, "Remove the secondary card holder, effective immediately." The representative confirmed the request, and I imagined Monica standing at some checkout line in shock. Her card declined for the first time. Not out of cruelty, but out of fairness. I wasn't done. I went through my bills one by one. Netflix cancel, Hulu cancel, gym membership that Monica used, but I never stepped foot in cancel. Car insurance that covered Derek's vehicle because he had once convinced me it was cheaper under my plan cancel. Phone line that I had added so Monica could have a family plan discount cancel. Each call, each click, each confirmation email was another thread snipped from the web that had trapped me. It wasn't only about money. It was about reclaiming my voice, my autonomy. For years, I had believed saying no would make me a bad mother, that my worth was tied to how much I provided. But as I sat there watching my accounts shrink in entanglement and grow in freedom, I realized that every cancel was really a yes. Yes to my dignity. Yes to my peace. Yes to the woman I had buried under sacrifice. Around noon, my phone began to buzz. At first, a single call, then another, then a flood. Derek's name flashed, then Monica's, then unknown. I knew what they had discovered. The flights were gone, the villa was gone, their cards were failing. My heart raced, but instead of panic, I felt calm. I let the phone ring and ring, the sound filling the room like a storm I refused to step into. I turned to my journal, one I hadn't opened in months. On a fresh page, I wrote, "From today, I will not pay for my own erasure." Then I made a list of every account, every subscription, every bill where my name appeared beside theirs. One by one, I crossed them out. Electricity? No. Internet? No. Streaming? No. By the end, only my own expenses remained. For the first time in decades, the ledger of my life belonged solely to me. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Not because the pain had vanished, it still pressed heavy on my chest, but because I had taken action. For once, I wasn't waiting for Monica to call for Derek to demand for another bill to land in my mailbox. I had turned off the faucet they had drunk from for so long. The next morning, I brewed another cup of tea and stood at the window. The oak tree swayed in the breeze, strong and rooted. I whispered, "I'm learning from you." I knew the storm would come, their anger, their fury, their pleas. But for the first time, I felt ready. Silent revenge was not about shouting or fighting. It was about reclaiming piece by piece what was mine. When the phone rang again, I didn't pick up. I wanted them to sit with the same silence they had handed me in a 12-second message. They thought they had written the script that I was still the supporting character. But I was rewriting it line by line with every bill I canceled, every card I cut, every boundary I drew. I sat at my desk, closed my eyes, and breathed. For the first time in decades, my life was no longer defined by what I gave away. It was defined by what I chose to keep. The storm did not wait long to arrive. By the third day, after enough cards had been declined and enough confirmations had landed in their inboxes, Monica appeared at my door. She didn't knock timidly, she pounded each strike like a hammer demanding entry. I opened slowly, holding the edge of the door as if it were a shield. Her face was flushed, her eyes sharp. Derek stood a few steps behind her on the porch, arms crossed, his jaw tight. They looked less like family and more like creditors come to collect. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" Monica snapped, brushing past me into the living room without waiting for an invitation. She stood in the center of the room, glaring as if she were the one betrayed. "The flights are gone. The villa is gone. Our cards are dead. Do you have any idea what kind of mess you've created?" I closed the door quietly, then turned to face her. My voice was calm, steadier than I thought it would be. "Yes, Monica. I know exactly what I've done. I canceled them." Her mouth fell open. You canceled everything. Why would you do that?" "We were counting on this trip." "Because you told me I wasn't invited," I said evenly. "You made it clear Derek didn't want me there." At the mention of his name, Derek finally stepped inside his presence, filling the room like a shadow. "That's not what she meant," he said smoothly, though his eyes gave away his irritation. "It was just a misunderstanding." "No," I replied, locking my gaze on him. There was no misunderstanding. I heard the message. Monica's words were clear. I was not wanted, so I decided to stop paying for places I don't belong. Monica's face crumpled, shifting between anger and something like guilt. "You can't just pull the rug out from under us like that." "Do you know how embarrassing it is to tell the kids the trip is canceled? Do you know what people will say?" I felt my chest tighten, but I did not bend. "Do you know how embarrassing it is to be erased from my own family, to pay for a trip and be told I'm not welcome? Embarrassment cuts both ways, Monica." Her eyes filled with tears, but I had seen them before. Tears used like currency tears that often ended with me reaching for my checkbook. This time I let them fall without rushing to comfort her. Derek stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Look, Gloria, you've always been generous. We appreciate that. But canceling everything like this, that's vindictive. That's not what family does." I turned to him, my voice cool. "And what family does is what, Derek? Take and take until there's nothing left. Dictate who belongs and who doesn't, even when the one paying the bills is the one excluded." He flinched just slightly, then recovered with a smirk. "You're being dramatic. You'll regret this once things calm down." "No," I said, shaking my head. "The only regret I have is not drawing these lines sooner." The silence that followed was thick, the kind of silence that reveals every fracture in a relationship. Monica looked between us, torn, but she did not defend me. She did not apologize. She simply whispered, "I can't believe you'd do this to your own daughter." That line cut deep, but I refused to let it pierce. "And I can't believe a daughter would do what you did to her mother." My voice trembled not from weakness, but from the force of years of swallowed words finally spoken. I raised you, Monica. I worked myself to the bone to give you everything, and in return, you've treated me like a wallet, not a mother. That ends now. Her tears fell harder, but she said nothing. Derek grabbed her arm, steering her toward the door. Come on, he muttered, his voice tight. We're wasting our time here. As they stepped outside, Monica turned back, once her face pale, her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but the words never came. The door closed between us with a finality I felt in my bones. I leaned against it, breathing slowly, my hands shaking. It had not been easy. It had hurt more than I could admit, but it was done. I had faced them not with shouting or pleading, but with truth. For the first time, I realized confrontation wasn't about winning an argument. It was about refusing to be erased, and in that moment, standing in the quiet of my home, I knew I had finally been heard. It didn't take long for the whispers to spread. By the end of that week, I felt them following me even in the aisles of the grocery store. People I had known for decades, neighbors, fellow church members, old colleagues, looked at me differently, their smiles brittle, their eyes cautious. It was Monica's doing. I saw it first on Facebook, a post with a smiling picture of her children in front of their half-packed suitcases. The caption read, "Heartbroken to tell our babies that Grandma canceled our family trip out of spite. We tried so hard to give her love, but some people can't accept happiness for others. Pray for us during this difficult time." Hundreds of comments flooded beneath it, some from strangers, some from people I knew. That's awful. I can't believe a mother would do that to her own daughter. Stay strong. Monica, toxic people don't change. The likes piled up. Each one felt like a nail driven into my chest. It wasn't just Facebook. Derek chimed in on Twitter, his words slick and sharp. Imagine canceling your grandkids' vacation because you can't stand not being the center of attention. Selfishness wears many faces, but it always looks the same. His followers retweeted it with disgust, tagging phrases like, "Family first," and "Pray for the kids." They painted me as a villain, a bitter old woman who couldn't celebrate her daughter's happiness. Even at church, the sting reached me. Mrs. Turner, who had once hugged me after every service, only gave a curt nod. The pastor's wife avoided my eyes. I overheard someone whisper, "That poor Monica stuck with such a cruel mother." They didn't know the truth. They hadn't heard the message that sliced me out of my own family's plans. For a moment, I wavered. Shame rose inside me like a tide, tempting me to defend myself, to run to Monica's page and pour my heart out in the comments. But then I remembered my mother's words in the oak tree outside my window. Respect is the only true gift. Respect could not be begged for. It had to be demanded, and sometimes it had to be proven. I decided I would not fight fire with fire, not yet. Instead, I gathered my evidence. I saved Monica's voice message, downloaded copies of my receipts, my bank transfers, the email confirmations that bore only my name. I kept them in a folder on my desktop labeled Truth. It comforted me to see the facts lined up neatly, waiting. Evidence never blinked. Evidence never lied. But the online smear campaign bled into real life. At the post office, the clerk who used to chat with me about her garden now served me quickly, eyes lowered. When I went to the farmer's market, I heard laughter die when I approached. It was Derek's voice in their heads, Monica's tears on their screens. I had been convicted in a trial I hadn't even attended. And yet, in that growing darkness, a small light emerged. My neighbor, Mrs. Jeanette Harris, stopped by one evening with a casserole and a firm look. I saw what she posted, she said, setting the dish on my counter. "But I also know you, Gloria. You've carried that girl since she was in diapers." People may believe her now, but truth has a way of surfacing. Her words steadied me. I realized then that this wasn't just about money or even betrayal. This was about my name, about the story of my life being twisted into a weapon against me, and I refused to let their version become the only one people heard. So I stayed quiet for now, letting Monica and Derek exhaust themselves in their performance. I let them think I was powerless, too ashamed to respond. All the while I built my case, quietly, methodically, patiently, because I knew the day would come when their lies would collapse under the weight of proof. And when that day came, it would not be me they saw as bitter or spiteful. It would be them caught in their own web, exposed by their own cruelty. The smear campaign hurt, yes. It isolated me, bruised me, made me question myself in the quiet hours of the night. But it also sharpened me. Each rumor, each falsehood was fuel. They thought they had silenced me, but they had only given me reason to speak louder when the moment was right. And deep in my bones, I knew that moment was coming. The days that followed were quiet, almost unbearably so. My phone, once buzzing constantly with Monica's requests and Derek's demands, now sat silent on the table. The absence of noise was jarring at first, like stepping into a house where all the clocks had stopped. I found myself wandering from room to room, listening to the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock. For years, my life had been filled with other people's voices. Now, there was only mine. Isolation pressed down hard in those first weeks. At the grocery store, conversations died when I walked past. At church pews seemed to shift subtly away from me. Even the mail felt colder, just bills and circulars without a single handwritten note. I had become the villain in a story Monica and Derek had written, and the world around me was reading their script. But as the loneliness stretched on, something surprising began to happen. In the quiet, I started to hear myself again. I pulled out old records I hadn't played in years, filling the living room with the sound of Billie Holiday and Ella Fitzgerald. I dusted off the sewing machine in the closet and began repairing clothes, the rhythmic whir soothing my nerves. Small acts, but they were mine. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table and made a list not of bills or errands, but of things I had once loved. Gardening, painting, baking bread, reading mysteries late into the night. It had been so long since I'd let myself do any of them, always telling myself I didn't have the time or the money. Yet here I was with both because I had finally stopped pouring them into a bottomless well. I began each morning with a walk beneath the oak tree, its leaves whispering above me like encouragement. I tended the small patch of soil in my backyard, planting tomatoes and basil herbs that filled the air with life. I joined a book club at the library, tentative at first, expecting cold shoulders. But there I found kind faces who only knew me as Gloria, the woman who loved Agatha Christie, not Gloria, the selfish mother painted online. The smear campaign still lingered, but its sting dulled with time. The more I invested in myself, the less power their words had. People who truly knew me began to question the story Monica spread. A few even reached out quietly, whispering support when no one else could hear. The silence, once suffocating, grew into something else: space. Space to breathe, to think, to reclaim the pieces of myself I had abandoned. It was not easy. I cried often, sometimes at night, sometimes in the middle of folding laundry when memories of Monica's laughter as a child would overwhelm me. But even the tears felt different now. They were not wasted on guilt or self-blame. They were cleansing like rain washing dust from a window. One evening, I sat with a fresh loaf of bread cooling on the counter, a mystery novel open in front of me, and realized I was not broken. I was bruised, yes, but also healing. I had lost a daughter's affection, or perhaps only the illusion of it, but in its place, I was gaining something I hadn't felt in decades myself. And though the world still murmured Monica's version of events, I carried the truth like a steady flame inside me. Evidence never blinked. Evidence never lied. And when the time came to step out of this quiet aftermath into the next battle, I knew I would not step alone. It began with an envelope I almost tossed aside, a thick white one stamped with the logo of a bank I didn't recognize. I slid it open absent-mindedly, expecting junk mail. But inside was a notice that froze me in place, payment past due, $25,000 a loan. My name was printed across the top in bold letters. For a moment, the words didn't make sense. A loan in my name. I hadn't borrowed a dime in years. My stomach turned cold as I flipped through the pages. Payment schedules, signatures, interest rates, and at the bottom, a scrawled version of my signature, crooked, careless, and nothing like mine. I sat there staring at it, pulse hammering in my ears. It didn't take a detective to know what had happened. Derek. He worked in finance, always quick to handle paperwork, always nudging Monica into letting him take the reins. It was easy to picture him forging my name, assuring the bank it was legitimate. Maybe he thought I'd never notice. Maybe he thought I was too old, too trusting. But he had underestimated me. I gathered every paper, every page, and slid them into a folder labeled Truth. That word felt heavier, now more urgent. The smear campaign was one thing. Lies and whispers I could weather. But this was fraud. This was criminal, and it had my name on it. The next morning, I called a lawyer, Patricia Owens. She'd been recommended by Jeanette, who described her as sharp as glass and twice as hard to break. Sitting in Patricia's office, I spread out the documents with shaking hands. They forged my name. I said, my voice trembling with both fear and fury. Patricia scanned the papers quickly, her brow furrowed. Then she leaned back, eyes hard. "You're right. This signature isn't yours, and the bank should have verified more carefully. But the good news, we can prove this, and once we do, Derek and Monica won't just have their smear campaign to worry about. They'll have the law breathing down their necks." For the first time in weeks, I felt the kind of relief that comes from someone standing beside you. Patricia didn't coddle me. She didn't dismiss me. She believed me, and she had teeth. Together, we began building the case. I provided old documents with my true signature mortgage papers, old checks, even a signed copy of my will. Patricia arranged for a handwriting expert to analyze the forgery. We pulled bank records tracing the loan funds directly into Derek's account. Each piece was another brick in the wall of evidence. And all the while, the online attacks against me continued. Monica posted another photo of her children captioned, "We may not have a vacation, but at least we have love." Some people don't understand that. The comments were full of pity, support, outrage on her behalf. They thought I was the villain. But Patricia reminded me, don't respond. Don't waste your breath online. Evidence never blinks. And when the truth comes out, it won't be hashtags that matter. It'll be the facts. Late at night, I would sit at my desk staring at the growing folder of proof. Fear still gnawed at me. Fear of losing Monica completely. Fear of facing public judgment. But alongside the fear was a sharper feeling resolve. They had taken my money, my reputation, my peace. They would not take my name. The oak tree outside swayed in the night wind, its branches casting long shadows across the yard. Strong, rooted, patient. I whispered to it, "I'll fight this. I'm not done yet." The smear campaign had wounded me, but the forged loan was their fatal mistake. They thought they could silence me with shame, bury me under lies. Instead, they had given me the weapon that would bring everything to light, and I was ready to use it. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and polished stone, a mix of tradition and judgment. I had never stepped foot inside as anything more than a visitor, yet now every step echoed like I was walking toward my reckoning. Patricia walked beside me, her heels sharp against the floor, her leather briefcase heavy with truth. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as we entered. On the opposite side, Monica and Derek sat together. Monica's face was pale mascara carefully painted to suggest fragility. Derek wore a smug confidence that made my stomach twist. Behind them sat a handful of church acquaintances and neighbors, curious eyes darting between us like they were watching a play. When the judge entered the room, fell silent. Patricia rose with a steady calm, presenting our case. One by one, she laid the papers on the evidence table. The forged loan contract, the handwriting analysis showing my true signature against Derek's forgery, bank statements tracing every dollar of the $25,000 into Derek's account, copies of the canceled trip receipts all in my name. Her voice was clear, cutting through the air. "Your Honor, this is not a family disagreement. This is fraud. This is financial abuse. My client, Mrs. Bennett, has been exploited for years, her finances drained under the guise of love and obligation. But this forged loan crosses the line into criminal conduct." Derek shot to his feet. "This is ridiculous! She gave us permission. She wanted to help her family." Patricia didn't flinch. She pointed to the handwriting expert seated nearby, who confirmed under oath that the signature was not mine. The judge's brow furrowed. "Mr. Daniels," he said, turning to Derek, "are you telling this court you believe you had consent when the signature has been proven forged?" For the first time, Derek faltered. His mouth opened, but no words came. Monica shifted uncomfortably in her seat, whispering something to him. Then her eyes flicked toward me, wide and wet, but I held her gaze. This was not the time for softness. Patricia pressed on. "Your Honor, beyond the forgery, there is a pattern here. Mrs. Bennett has evidence of decades of financial entanglement bills, subscriptions, loans, all in her name. used primarily by her daughter and son-in-law. This is not a mother being generous. This is a woman being treated as an endless wallet. And when she finally refused, they retaliated by smearing her character publicly. The judge looked at the stack of documents before him. He tapped his gavel lightly, thoughtful. I see enough here to refer the matter to criminal investigation for fraud. And as for repayment of the loan, Mr. Daniels, you are solely responsible. Mrs. Bennett will not be held liable. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Derek's face flushed crimson. Monica reached for his arm, but he shook her off, eyes blazing with fury. Patricia wasn't finished. She produced a final piece, a printed transcript of Monica's voice message. She read it aloud, her tone even but firm. You won't be flying with us. Derek doesn't want you there. The words filled the silent courtroom, undeniable cold. The judge's expression hardened. So not only was Mrs. Bennett excluded from the very trip she paid for, but her finances were also manipulated to fund it. This court has no patience for such exploitation. He turned to Monica. Ma'am, I suggest you reflect carefully on how you've allowed this to happen. My chest tightened, but not from fear. From relief. From validation. After months of lies and whispers here, it was truth spoken in a room where evidence mattered more than tears. When the gavel finally struck, the sound rang like thunder. Derek would face charges. The loan was voided. My name was cleared. As people filed out, I stayed seated, hands trembling. Patricia leaned down, her voice low. You did it, Gloria. You stood tall. Evidence never blinks, and today it won. For the first time in what felt like forever, I breathed without the weight of shame. Justice had arrived, and it wore my name. In the weeks after the trial, my house felt lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. The phone still didn't ring with Monica's voice, and Derek's shadow was gone from my doorstep. For the first time in years, I could walk through each room without the burden of someone else's demands hanging in the air. It was just me, and though the quiet hurt at times, it was also a kind of freedom I had never known. I began to build new rhythms. Every morning, I brewed my tea and carried it out to the porch where the oak tree stood faithful as ever. I would sit in the soft light, journal in hand, and write not about what I owed or what I feared, but about what I wanted. Small things at first: bake a pie. Repaint the kitchen, read 3 chapters before bed. Then bigger things: join the senior community center, take a woodworking class, maybe even travel not for someone else but for me. The first time I walked into that woodworking class, I felt out of place. Men in flannel shirts and women with tool belts moved confidently around the workshop. But when I picked up the smooth weight of a chisel and pressed it into the grain of wood, something clicked. The sound of carving, the scent of sawdust, it grounded me. Every week, I shaped planks into something useful, something solid. A small stool, a birdhouse, a shelf. Each creation felt like a piece of myself built strong and steady with my own 2 hands. Neighbors began to notice the change. Mrs. Harris stopped by often, sometimes with casseroles, sometimes with nothing but conversation. You're glowing, Gloria, she told me one afternoon as we sat sipping lemonade in the backyard. And I realized she was right. The bitterness that once curled at the corners of my mouth had begun to fade. In its place was something softer, steadier, peace. I didn't cut Monica out of my heart completely. I don't think any mother truly can. Sometimes late at night, I still replayed her childhood laughter in my head, or imagined her hand slipping into mine when she was small. But I had learned a truth I could not unlearn: love cannot survive without respect. And until she was ready to offer that, I would not let her back into my life on her terms. The smear campaign lost steam as the truth from court spread. The neighbors who had once whispered began to smile at me again, cautious at first, then warmer. At church, Mrs. Turner hugged me as though nothing had ever passed between us. Some apologies came quietly in hushed voices after service. I'm sorry, Gloria. I should have known better. I accepted them not out of bitterness, but because forgiveness felt lighter than resentment. One evening, I sat on my porch with the finished birdhouse in my lap. I hung it from a low branch of the oak tree and watched as a small sparrow landed on its edge, peeking curiously inside. The sight made me smile. That birdhouse, simple and sturdy, was like me, rebuilt, no longer empty, ready to hold something new. Healing wasn't a straight path. There were still days I cried, still moments the loneliness clawed at me. But with each sunrise, with each project, with each moment of laughter shared with new friends, I grew stronger. I was no longer the woman erased by her daughter's cruelty. I was Gloria Bennett, 67 years old, standing tall beneath an old oak tree, finally learning that my life was mine to claim. As autumn settled in the air, crisp and tinged with wood smoke, I realized something profound. The story of my life had shifted. For decades, it had been written by others, by Monica's requests, by Derek's schemes, by a community willing to believe lies before seeking truth. But standing on my porch beneath the oak tree, watching its golden leaves scatter across the yard, I knew the pen was finally back in my hand. I was not the villain they painted online. I was not a bitter old woman lashing out in spite. I was a mother who loved deeply, perhaps too deeply, and who had finally drawn the line where love ended and self-respect began. It was not cruelty. It was survival. It was dignity. Sometimes people ask me if I regretted canceling the trip, cutting the cards, exposing Derek in court. My answer is simple. I regret waiting so long. I regret teaching my daughter that I would always say yes no matter the cost. But I do not regret reclaiming myself. Evidence never blinks. And when the truth came to light, it did not just clear my name, it saved me. Life now is quieter, but it is honest. I rise each day with small joys, the smell of bread baking, the sound of my hammer against wood, the laughter of friends at the senior center. I tend my garden, I feed the sparrows in the birdhouse I built, and I let the silence heal me instead of haunt me. And on Sundays, when I stand in church and sing hymns, my voice no longer trembles with shame. It carries strength. Monica has not called since the trial. Perhaps one day she will. If she does, I will listen, but I will not bend, because I have learned that boundaries are not walls to shut people out. They are doors, and only those who knock with respect may enter. To anyone listening to my story now, whether you are a parent drained by ungrateful children or a person erased by those you love, hear me clearly, you are not a wallet. You are not a doormat. You are not less worthy because others fail to see your value. Respect is not a gift you beg for. It is the ground you stand on, the line you defend. I share this because I know I am not alone. So many of us, especially as we grow older, are told that sacrifice is love, that silence is peace, that giving endlessly is the only way to keep family close. But I am living proof that the opposite is true. Boundaries create respect. Boundaries create truth. And truth in the end sets you free. As I close this chapter, I want to leave you with an invitation. If my story touched something inside you, if you've ever felt used, dismissed, or erased by the people who should have loved you most, share your story in the comments. You never know whose heart your words might heal. And if you believe in reclaiming your voice, your dignity, your worth, then please subscribe because there are more stories to tell and more truths to bring to light. My name is Gloria Bennett. I am 67 years old. I have been betrayed, smeared, and silenced, but not anymore. Now I stand tall beneath my oak tree, unbroken, unashamed, and finally free.